Okay, I just wanted to do a quick video providing, I guess, an explanation or description of how I would go about using MSI's Afterburner to try and track down a bottleneck in a computer, playing a computer game. Um, so if, once you get Afterburner installed, this is what it looks like when you start it up. And what I'm interested in are the monitoring capabilities of this program. So you click settings down here, go to monitoring, and there's a whole range of items that you can monitor in real time while you're playing a game. And I've already gone through and checked the ones that might be of some interest to try and diagnose where a slowdown is occurring. The first item here is the GPU temperature. Then the other one I might look at would be the fan speed to make sure that the fan's operating. Core clock shows whether the GPU itself is speeding up properly when it's under load, or whether it's underclocking itself because maybe it's getting too hot or drawing too much power. Memory clock, that's probably not going to be an issue, but you can look and see if likewise the memory is clocking up under load like it should be. You can also look at, and this is probably significant, is how much load is being placed on the graphics card. This will be a percentage. Whether the graphics card is running at its full capacity, if so, it would say it's being used 100%. Memory usage, this is probably, again, less significant for the kind of slowdown you're likely to see. But basically it shows how much of the memory on your graphics card is being used while you're playing the game. Power. These cards have a power limit, and they'll kind of run up to make use of as much of the chip processing power as they can without drawing too much electrical power. So it might be interesting to see if you're bumping up against a power limit with your card. And let's see, those I think are it for the GPU. Likewise for the CPUs, this is per each core. So I've got 4 processor cores here, and what I'm going to be looking at is what percentage of the core's capacity is being used while you're playing the game. And then finally, if you want, you can look at the frame rate as well. These things, okay, so I've already selected all these items, and then they show up over here on this graph. And you can actually, well, you have to hit OK. You can actually detach this graph, and it's a separate little window. And unfortunately, on my screen, there's not enough room to see the whole length of the list at once, so you will have to scroll. But I mean, here everything is. This is the 33 here is the GPU temperature, 33 degrees centigrade. The fan's kind of idling at 1200 RPM. Core clock is relatively low at this point, at 1100, and or I guess that's the yeah, and then the memory clock is 37. Now that's actually at the full clock speed there. And but the GPU usage is low. Memory, I'm only using 355 megabytes of my 2 gigabytes of memory. And the power percentage, I'm only using about 30% of the card's power capacity before it, hits its limit of how much power it can draw. CPUs are doing very little at this point. Each core here is, 10 to 20%, well, even lower sometimes. And then the frames per second, there's nothing that shows up here on this one because, I'm not running a game or anything. The other thing just to point out is you can Let's see if I can get back to this. Now this is going to stay on top. I guess once I detached it, it wants to stay on top. Under settings here, you can also have these graphs show up on your screen in your game as kind of an overlay to your game while you're playing it. If you click on each item here, like here's GPU temperatures highlighted, and then come down here, you can check show in on-screen display, and then you get to choose what it would show, and I've got it set to show a graph. So I've gone through for each of these things that I've checked and marked it to show in the on-screen display as a graph, so I could actually just glance over or easily see what's going on while I'm playing the game without having to turn to a different screen. That may be distracting for some people, and they might prefer just to keep it on a off-screen display like this one over here, and then maybe Alt-Tab out of the game. You might have to do that to scroll it, because you may not be able to scroll it without losing the focus or leaving focus from the game itself. And let's see here. Well, let's do this. I was trying to figure out why I'm already using some of this graphics card. It's because I'm using the NVIDIA encoding chip on the card to encode this video as I'm making it. That's why it's not, everything's not completely idle at this point over there. But anyway, let's see what happens if I start up a 3D benchmark to put some load on the system here, more so than just encoding is doing. I'll start up a 3D benchmark that I run sometimes, and it'll be running on a separate screen here, and we'll just kind of look at the change in the graphics over here. See if I can do this here. Yeah. Okay, yeah, here's the top one. Here's the temperature is already starting to go up. Eventually this fan speed will start to go up as well now. The clock speed on the GPU core has gone up a little bit. This hasn't changed, I guess, because the memory was being used for the video encoding. But the GPU usage now has jumped up quite a bit. I mean, it's basically running a 3D benchmark. The GPU is running at full capacity is what that shows. It's actually using a little more of the memory, even though the clock speed on the memory was at its highest level, running as fast as it could. It's using more of the memory capacity now, 1200 out of 2000. And the power usage has gone up as well now. We're about 83% of the card's power capacity. And I just lost focus on the game here, or the benchmark here. Let me bring it back up. And scrolling down, we can see that the CPUs are being used, but they're not at their limit. The highest is about 65–70% on this core number 1. The other cores are much less. And then here we see the frames per second show up now, and basically this is all my video card can do with this benchmark is about 30 frames per second. But if there was a problem going on, things you might see that would be important to keep an eye on would be the temperature. If this starts pushing up around 80 degrees, then the card's going to start clocking back. If the fan's not working, you'll be able to see that. If it's overheating and underclocking, this clock speed will start to drop here on the card. And of course, the GPU usage will stay at 100%. While it's running. That should be at 100%. If it's not, then the bottleneck is somewhere else. In this case, as we can see, I'm pretty much bottlenecked by my video card. But if it wasn't that, you might come down here to the CPU usage. Well, yeah, one thing is you might see whether the power is up past 100%. I keep losing focus and the bunch bar drops to the taskbar. The CPU usage might be up around 100% for one or more of the cores, and that would tell you that that's what's holding things up then, that it's not the GPU not being able to keep up with what's going on, it's the processor that's being overloaded. I mean, for instance, if instead of using the NVIDIA encoder for making this video, if I was using the CPU to encode this video, and I had the compression set to a very high level of compression, so it needed a lot of CPU clock cycles to complete that, then that might start to cut into the my CPU capacity, and that in turn would then limit how much of the GPU can do, because it requires a certain amount of CPU time to keep itself running at full speed. So once the CPU's hit its max, you could put in a much more powerful video card and it's not going to make any difference, because the CPU is not going to be able to keep up at that point. Well, anyway, I'll just leave it at that. That's kind of the kind of stuff I would look at to try and track down why a game wasn't performing well on my system, or why I was having difficulties getting the kind of performance I was expecting out of while playing a certain game. Anyway, hope that's helpful.